Journalists Roundtable is a half-hour discussion with Pennsylvania journalists about the week's top political news and current events. Journalists Roundtable is a production of PCN, a nonprofit television network. Listeners like you make our programming possible. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.
Welcome to Journalists Roundtable. I'm Ellen France. Our guests today are Tirzah Christopher, Capitol Affairs investigative reporter with Pennlive, Jaxon White, state capitol reporter with WITF, and Carmen Russell-Sluchansky, multi-platform reporter with WHYY News Philadelphia. Thank you all for being here today. We are a week and a half out from Election Day. How engaged are voters? Carmen, we'll start with you.
It's a really good question. Typically these elections, these judicial elections that we have on these off years don't garner too much attention, but we do see a lot of people getting at least approached by both sides of the debate, getting mailers and so forth, getting door knocks and so forth. So, although it's hard to say exactly how many people will end up coming out during the election, it will, it's unprecedented in how much at least they're being contacted by campaigns. For example, you have even the Democratic National Committee unprecedentedly getting involved in an election, judicial elections that they just wouldn't have in the past. So I anticipate a lot more people at least know this election is happening than any time in the past.
Jaxon, do you want to add on to that?
Yeah, as Carmen said, it is very unprecedented what we've seen here. These judicial retention elections are usually pretty quiet. But this year, the Republican Party is really going after the 3 Supreme Court justices that are up for retention. I should probably name them. Christine Donahue, Kevin Doherty, and David Wecht. All 3 were elected as Democrats in 2015. They're up for retention this year. It's a simple yes or no vote whether these justices should retain their seats on the bench. Republicans are going after these justices for past rulings they've made, upholding the state's mail-in balloting laws, upholding COVID shutdowns during the COVID pandemic, and but plenty of other rulings the Republicans have targeted. And Democrats have really stepped in trying to defend these judges. The justices themselves have, they've made rare appearances at a public forum earlier this year, and they're really campaigning to hold their seats. It's just unprecedented in what we've seen, like Carmen said. And it'll be interesting to see how much that has stuck with voters in an election that usually sees, around 1/3 of voters participating. Pundits are, they're saying that this could be a year with much more turnout, but it'll be interesting to see what happens on November 4th.
I just want to add one issue to the very excellent rundown that Jaxon just made, which is that another issue that Republicans are looking to change the course of is abortion. He's got a number of pro-life, anti-abortion, efforts to remove those justices, because ultimately, at some point, the state Supreme Court might make the decision whether or not the state itself prohibits or somehow, further restricts abortion.
And since 2022, when the Supreme Court decided to overturn Roe v. Wade, I think a lot of the spotlight turned to state laws. Last year, Donahue overturned a previously upheld ruling in Pennsylvania saying that, which said that Medicaid dollars could not go towards covering abortion. And even though that wasn't a final ruling, it set a precedent which said that abortion restrictions could be sex-based discrimination. And so I think, there's big decisions that are going to be made by the Supreme Court in the near future. And it matters who's on the Supreme Court.
While we're on the subject of abortion, Tirzah, you did write about attending the Pennsylvania March for Life. What did that look like? How were the crowds? How were they reacting?
Yeah, there were thousands at the rally, and people felt strongly. I spoke to young women. I spoke to people who've been rallying for this issue for years, but they wanted to urge for tougher abortion laws. And yeah.
In your article, you mentioned talking to a woman about pro-life Republican woman about Republican gubernatorial candidate Stacey Garrity and her views on abortion. What did they say about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So those women had concerns that Stacey Garrity, the current treasurer, was taking down some posts from her website that were more anti-abortion, and I think their exact quote was, they found it, quote, wishy-washy, and compared it to another previous gubernatorial candidate, Mastriano, who they mentioned got a lot of hate because of his views on abortion.
And Carmen, you also wrote about the Commonwealth Court election this year. Are the stakes high in that race too, or just the Supreme Court?
I mean, no, the stakes are pretty high in that you have one open seat and you have a Republican and a Democrat, the Republican Matthew Walford and the Democrat Stella Tsai vying for that seat. So you do have a competitive race there. You also have one vote for retention, one seat up for retention vote. I mean, the Commonwealth Court is extremely important. It garners even less attention than the state Supreme Court, because the Commonwealth Court, makes a lot of decisions about in terms of appeals where the state or municipal governments or city governments, whoever, are a party, right? So if you have an issue with, let's say, the state, or you're suing the state, or you're pushing back against some policy or something, and then you lose and you appeal that, it's going to be the Commonwealth Court that ultimately decides what, if you're right, or if the County of Lancaster is right in that case.
Now, the election for this November is underscored by the state budget negotiations, which are now still going on, about 4 months past due at the end of June. Jaxon, do you have any recent updates about what's been going on with that process?
No significant actions have been taken to really end this this budget impasse that we're in. They have one more week until it hits about the 4 months, as you mentioned. This week, the Senate doubled down on their efforts to fund the state at last year's levels. They passed just under a $48 billion budget, but that's really a non-starter for House Democrats and Governor Josh Shapiro. They've really said that number would not adequately fund the government at its point. They've said that it is essentially a budget cut, as inflation has raised prices for schools, counties, nonprofits. But right now, those organizations those like government agencies and organizations aren't getting any state money. They've had their payments paused since the budget was supposed to be passed on June 30th, and they're reeling right now. A lot of counties are taking out debt, schools are taking debt, and they're in a tough position. So I think that's where the Senate's coming from. They're trying to get that money out to those organizations on last year's numbers. The House a couple weeks ago passed another budget. It was a decrease from Governor Shapiro's pitch and a former budget that they passed. It was just over $50 billion. And we really saw the tensions in the Capitol burn over that point. I think that was 2 weeks ago now at this point. They were, at different press conferences, they were shouting names at each other. They were saying the other sides are bargaining without good faith. But at this point, the finger pointing continues, and there hasn't really been much real action. So it's unclear when this impasse will be resolved.
Carmen, you wrote about how schools are failing during this impasse. What are they doing to supplement this funding that they are missing right now?
Well, they're doing a lot of borrowing, digging into their rainy day funds and so forth. I should note that it's the programs, it's special programs, such as for students with disabilities, technical programs, and so forth, that are first getting hit, because those are not not considered like the way the state budget works. A lot of things that are considered necessary continue. So basic education, like public education, is not going to just suddenly grind to a halt, regardless of how long it lasts. But there are a lot of aspects, around education including like special needs programs and extracurricular programs and so forth. Now, how long they can continue to borrow, is going to, is going to have its own impact, right? Because that comes with money, for interest that they didn't budget and so forth. So they're, in the long run, this is going to cost school districts considerably more money, depending on how long it lasts and so forth. And we just don't, how long they can continue to do that, how long the rainy day funds last and everything is of question.
Like Carmen mentioned too, this interest is building up, but it's important to note that that interest falls onto taxpayers to pay off. The schools are paying that out of their own budget. It's a sort of wonky part of this, but it's really just building more money and stressing more of these schools, counties, and their budgets because of the interest they have to accrue on taking out these loans.
I also wanted to add, school districts and counties have to pass their budgets by their deadline no matter what. It's not the same. They don't get the same leeway as the state does, so they're also planning for the future without knowing how much money they are going to get or when they're going to get that money. So that adds on to all the other problems that Jaxon and Carmen mentioned.
And actually, just one added thing, by the way, there's federal dollars that have already been allocated, which the state has to disperse, and that money they're not getting as well. So there's even money, that they should be getting from the federal government. And then obviously with the federal government shutdown, we'll see how, if that money, if there's ever a CR to replace that money as well in the future. So that, who knows? I mean, that could just be completely lost. We have no idea.
Now, Tirzah, you wrote an article about a place in the Capitol where they do these negotiations. What can you tell us about the rules room?
Absolutely, yeah. I should say the quote rules room because the name itself it's not officially printed outside the room or anything, but that's where a lot of, millions and billions of dollars have moved through the rules room. So right now, the state budget, whenever it comes out, will go through the rules room before making it back to the floor and to the governor's desk. And so the big thing is there's no live streaming, but also experts I spoke to said that it raises questions about transparency because right now, legally, the maximum number of people allowed in the room is 40 people. What if more than 40 people want to attend? Right now, they unfortunately can't. And so, I know senators, there have been some senators who've been pushing for change for live streaming. That's what I wrote about.
Carmen just mentioned, along with the state budget impasse, the federal government is also at a shutdown. Does anyone want to comment about how that started and how that's affecting Pennsylvania?
Well, it's really been difficult to gauge how it's impacting Pennsylvania. I just wrote a story recently about how 2 million Pennsylvanians aren't going to be receiving their SNAP benefits for the month of November, as long as the budget impasse or the federal budget impasse continues through November. Really, this is stemming from a debate over Democrats really are holding their votes on a temporary CR because they're looking to extend the Obamacare enhanced tax credits that more than 150,000 Pennsylvanians are on. If those are allowed to expire, Penny, who organizes the health insurance marketplace in Pennsylvania, estimates that around 150,000 people may not continue their coverage just because they're going to be seeing spiked premium rates. So it's a tricky situation. Pennsylvania doesn't have a federal budget money coming in from the federal budget, and it doesn't have its own state budget. So it's really sort of an unprecedented state, from my understanding, and really gauging that impact is really difficult to do.
Have you heard from our two senators or our congressional delegation anything about their reaction to the federal shutdown?
So it's mostly been along partisan lines. Republicans are trying to push the CR. Democrats are trying to push for these tax credit extensions, except for one notable exception, Senator John Fetterman. The Democrat has really stood sort of opposite his party and insisted that the government be open. The Senate has been hosting nonstop votes to reopen the government with their temporary budget plan. And Fetterman is one of a few Democrats, I think one of two, who has backed that plan. He says that he doesn't want. He's said language like Democrats are hosting the government or holding the government hostage, and he said that he wouldn't do that. He has noted that he supports extending the tax benefits, but he said that he wouldn't hold the government hostage to do that.
I'll say that I hear a lot from the Democrats from a campaign perspective, in that they are clearly trying, looking to make this an issue for next year, for the midterm elections next year, and they've targeted four representatives, four U.S. Members of the U.S. House that they say have been party to this problem. And so it's clearly going to be, and actually, when you brought up Stacey Garrity earlier, they're already making the governor's race, because she actually, she obviously is a Republican, but she's also made statements about things like, the big beautiful bill and so forth. So they're clearly trying to make this a big issue right out of the gates for midterm elections.
Has the state or the Shapiro administration put anything in place to assist Pennsylvanians during this shutdown at all, or especially with the SNAP benefits going away?
So the Shapiro administration told me they can't make up those payments. It doesn't have the money. That's SNAP in PA is fully federally funded. So areas like Philadelphia County, Fayette County, and Cameron County, those are the three highest populated counties that, or the highest rate at which their populations are enrolled in SNAP. Those counties especially are going to be hit hard by this, because they're just not going to be receiving SNAP payments, and plenty of other programs are being hit by these federal shutdowns that the Shapiro administration said that it can't make up in its funds, because the state in its own right is having its own budgetary issues.
This past weekend was the second occurrence of the No Kings rallies. Jaxon, were you at these rallies, and what did you see?
Yeah, I stopped by the Harrisburg rallies outside the state capitol, and then I went down to Lancaster City for theirs downtown. Sort of what we come to expect from these rallies. A lot of opposition toward President Trump's policies. There were speakers who highlighted criticisms of Trump's crackdown on immigration, the impact of his tariffs on small businesses, cuts to government research in the medical fields. There were chants, homemade signs, plenty of imagery to strike at President Trump. And honestly, there was a little bit something different this time. I noticed a lot of music. There were a lot of musicians who were playing. There were tens of thousands of people at these rallies combined. So I can only imagine what the rallies out in Philadelphia and Pittsburgh and some more populated areas look like. From my understanding, they were largely peaceful. A lot of the people that I talked to were pretty upset by the Republican Party's characterization of these protests as the quote, hate America rally, I think is what House Speaker Mike Johnson referred to them as. Plenty of people were carrying American flags. Their signs were quoting the U.S. Constitution. These people, from what they told me, they just want to see this the U.S. pivot from the point that it's at right now, and be more welcoming to people. And they really just said that they were there to make their voices heard and speak out against the Trump administration.
And Tirzah, you wrote about Governor Shapiro recently speaking at a press conference involving media literacy. What caused him to focus on that?
Absolutely. So Governor Shapiro was talking about how AI has, now come to be part of the major conversations we're having about social media, especially after President Donald Trump recently posted what appeared to be an AI video of U.S. Representative Hakeem Jeffries, and he cited that along with other major incidents happening all online, and said that it was very important that media literacy should start in schools. And he reiterated a program that was started last year, which had resources for students, teachers, and educators on how to basically differentiate between what is disinformation, misinformation, and real information in the world of AI.
And what impact do you think a proper media literacy education would have on America as a whole?
Absolutely. I think something that was telling that I mentioned in my story is I got to talk to some young reporters, high school reporters, and they were talking about how hard it's getting to tell what is real and what is not, and said that starting this kind of education in school, starting when at a very young age would actually be very helpful during this time when everyone uses, a lot of people use social media to even consume their news. So, yeah.
And Carmen, you've been following a story involving Bucks County and their sheriff. Can you tell us a little bit about background on that?
Sure. So Sheriff Herron of Bucks County signed what's called the 287G agreement with ICE, which basically deputizes his office to perform immigration-related enforcement, and that obviously didn't sit well with some residents of Bucks County. Bucks County is an incredibly split, very purplish county. And so there were complaints about that, and they sued basically the local NAACP, Make the Road, some local organizations, human rights and immigration organizations sued over that, and it went to court. The judge in that case found that they didn't have standing because there wasn't enough evidence of harm that was already done. So basically opening the door for the possibility of a future case in which, after maybe someone has an issue with ICE, but also the county commissioners there voted a resolution that basically reaffirmed what they believed, that they had the right to review such an agreement. But the judge also found that Herron had already signed agreements, memorandums of understanding with the federal government before, and so therefore, and they didn't, that wasn't an issue before. He didn't need their approval for that, and so therefore they didn't have that. He also found basically they didn't have to approve this one either.
And how common are these situations in which federal immigration enforcement teams up with local police forces?
Very common, and there are already other counties in Pennsylvania that have done this. In fact, there are a couple of sheriffs from around the state, including from Butler County, who came in and testified on Herron's behalf. So much actually that there is a program. There's the 287G program is codified. It's there. I should also point out, just Herron has specifically said that the only thing his office plans to do is to anybody that they actually arrest for a crime, they'll just run them through the ICE database, which he doesn't even have access to yet because it's not all finalized. And then if there is an ICE hold, if there's an ICE detention hold on that person, they'll turn them over to ICE. But the commissioners also said that they should have approval because it could end up costing the county a lot of money if there's a liability problem. If there's like a big case, somebody gets hurt or whatnot.
And Tirzah, you wrote on the similar subject of immigration about President Trump's visa fee. What impact would that have on immigrants coming to the United States?
Absolutely. Well, the $100,000 visa fee ultimately falls on the employers. And the biggest impact that I wrote about was how rural hospitals in Pennsylvania that already faced federal cuts because of the Trump administration's recent cuts, the $100,000 fee would reduce the number of medical personnel available there because experts basically said how in Pennsylvania there's a shortage of doctors in rural hospitals, and usually those are the jobs that advertise to H-1B visa holders, for example. And so I think that would be one of the major impacts of the $100,000 fee in Pennsylvania.
No, you and Jaxon both write for publications that are based out of South Central Pennsylvania around the capital. Have either of you heard anything about, per se, like immigration officers teaming up with local government entities? Is that a common thing we see in this part of the state?
Yeah, I've seen it happening a lot. Before I started at WITF a couple months ago, I worked at LNP, Lancaster Online, out in Lancaster County, and there are plenty of municipalities there that have been signing on with ICE. It's normally at these meetings where this comes up in the agenda, you see a bunch of people locally come and speak out against it. But then you see a lot of people who speak up for it and are very supportive of it. So it's a really contentious issue, even here in Central PA. It's interesting to hear the different points.
Carmen, you also wrote about another court case in the Philadelphia area. It was a high-profile case in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. Can you talk about what that was?
Yeah. So, in this this strange quirk of nature and law, Mahmoud Khalil, the Columbia student who was set for deportation because of his school activism, his campus activism, he ended up at the Third Circuit Court of Appeals in Philly, and now he was arrested in New York, and he was detained in Louisiana. So how did he end up in a court in Philly? Well, it was really kind of a funny question. He apparently spent less than a day in between New York and Philly. After they arrested him, he was detained in New Jersey for a very short period of time, something like a day, before he was transported to Louisiana. So New Jersey falls under the Third Circuit Court of Appeals. There was a New Jersey judge when his lawyers filed their attempt, to get an injunction from him being deported. Apparently he just happened to be in New Jersey at that moment, and so that ended up in the New Jersey court. It was transferred from New York to New Jersey. They filed in New York because they didn't know where he was, and ICE wasn't, forthcoming about that. So they filed in New York. It was transferred to New Jersey because that's where it turned out he was at that moment. And then that judge, the New Jersey judge, found his detention to be unconstitutional, and then so the Trump administration appealed that, and that's when it ended up in the Third Circuit Court of Appeals here in Philly, which actually hears New Jersey cases.
One final question for you, Carmen. How will situations like this impact the DA's race in Philadelphia?
Well, Mahmoud Khalil, I don't think will have much of an impact. There was a high-profile murder just recently, a young woman who was found dead, and so that's actually may make an impact right now. I mean, I think mostly for the most part, anybody who's watching does expect Larry Krasner to win again over Judge Dugan, his challenger. By the way, just for the background, Judge Dugan had run in the primary as a Democrat. He lost that, and now he's running under the Republican ticket. He says he's still registered as a Democrat. I haven't sought to verify that. But now, because it does appear that the DA's office had arrested the suspect before, and ended up letting him go because because the victim at the time did not come forward to make a statement in court. They ended up letting him go, and then it looks like he murdered this young woman. So they're making an issue of that at the moment.
All right, well, we are unfortunately out of time. Our guests today have been Carmen Russell-Sluchansky, multi-platform reporter with WHYY News in Philadelphia, Jaxon White, state capitol reporter with WITF, and Tirzah Christopher, Capitol Affairs investigative reporter with Pennlive. Thank you all so much for participating. That's it for Journalist Roundtable. I'm Ellen France. Thank you for watching.
Full episodes of politics and policy content like the program you just listened to are available to stream with the PCN Select app. Discover other shows like the Capitol Preview, On the Issues, candidate interviews, and more. To learn more about PCN's mission and to support PCN with a donation, visit PCNTV.com. This link and others can be found in our show notes. We appreciate your support.